when employees hear the executive team talking about digital transformation, what's going through the back of their mind is, will I have a job? Now, it's far preferable if you can say, yeah, actually, our company is going to be even better into the future. And as part of that, you're going to have great skills that are transferable. Even if you decide to move on, your skills will be upgraded.
Hello everyone, we are here again with Super Lawyer Talk, where we are today introducing Mr. Moroney, who is in Greater Dublin area and is considered top 10 digital disruption and fintech thinker of today, and he has been a co-founder of Digital Transformation Lab as well. I would let him introduce his things, what all he has done, and how he is going to guide us through his experience today. Welcome, Tony. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Divya. As Divya said, my name is Tony Moroney. I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, which is a small little country just on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. But I'm delighted to be here today. My background, I suppose, I started in industry. I then moved into consulting, then into international consulting, then into education, and into thought leadership. And I suppose, from my perspective, my whole world circles around digital disruption, from an advisory, from an education, from a thought leadership perspective. So I'm looking at it through many lenses, which is a really interesting, eclectic way to look at the world. And I'm delighted to be able to share some thoughts with you here today.
Amazing. So I'll start right away by asking you the very first question about your journey from obtaining an MBA and becoming the program director for digital leadership, and then leading cybersecurity programs at Irish Management Institute. How did you do everything in this life and achieve such height where you are considered the top digital leader? You are in top 10 for sure.
It's interesting, and I might actually step back a little bit. I came out of school straight into work. And when I was about 22, I had a very good assistant general manager who said to me, Tony, you're a great guy, but you're going to need to get your qualifications behind you. So I went back to college as a mature student, and I studied marketing in Ireland and the UK. And then I decided I wanted to do an MBA. And I did an MBA. And I think, look, regardless of what study you do, the key thing that education does for you, it gives you a perspective and it gives you optionality. And that's really important because, we're now in a world where careers are probably a thing of the past, and we will have multiple careers. And what education does is it allows you to be flexible and to respond to the environment you're in. It helps you to make sense of it, and it helps you to move from one type of role to another type of role. So in my case, I started my career in industry. The industry I was in financial services. It hit a crisis in 2009. I was running an entity that couldn't be funded anymore because the markets were closed. And I decided to change careers, and I went into consulting. I quickly moved into international consulting, which had me working all over the world. And then as I was working through all that, I noticed that in the education space, there was a big gap because the type of work I was doing was around strategic consulting, which includes digital and digital transformation. Because for me, digital is not a strategy, it's part of your strategy. While that might sound like a subtle difference, it's a huge difference because we're not running organizations for digital, we're running organizations to achieve their goals. And in that context, we look at digital. So I started having conversations with the Irish Management Institute around the role of digital as a leadership skill. Because if we think about it, Divya, I certainly was born pre the internet and I was born pre the smartphone. So were most business leaders, certainly at the board level and the senior level, and even probably in a mid-management level. Like the first iPhone was 2007. So when you put it in that context, what has happened in the last 20 years is just absolutely incredible. So I started working with the Irish Management Institute in terms of developing programs around digital leadership, digital disruption, cyber leadership, and very much in the context of let's understand what this means for our business, not in the context of how do we build it, because we can get people to build it, but that's not the issue. The issue that most organizations have is understanding the context for which the technology will operate in their environment and the outcomes it will drive, but also in terms of will it mean that they stay competitive or they become obsolete? And it's helping business people and leaders and people who are working in business, including lawyers, to figure out, well, what does this actually mean and how can we embrace it to help our organization to move forward?
Wow. So you have been a global leader and you are talking in terms of business, including legal business as well, if I may say so. You have been actively engaged in various global committees and forums. What kind of interconnection, or let's say, what kind of global landscape have you seen in terms of technology, kind of innovation, the kind of financial inclusion which has recently started? Keeping in mind the kind of legal regimes which we have, I'm pretty sure that you must have encountered that part as well. So how do you see that kind of connection, and how far has all this industry come back in past, say, let's say 2 decades, as you rightly said, that iPhone industry is after 2007.
The way I look at this, when I was young, they used to talk about America being, a big country with 300 million people. India now has several times that. But when you think of the digital world, there's 5 billion plus people on the internet. So we are working in a truly global environment. And there are wonderful things happening all over the world every single day. And some of this is not necessarily from the established countries, it's emerging countries where the fact that they didn't necessarily have the technological infrastructure is a great advantage because they don't have the legacy and they're able to bypass that, particularly in the era of mobile phones, where they can create new services. They can, deal with financial inclusion. I mean, the mobile phone has probably been the most wonderful tool to help with financial inclusion. And in some countries, it's been down to simple things like trading phone credits on your phone. So I think what we're seeing is that right across the globe on every single day, there is someone thinking about how to make the world better or how to do things differently or how to actually help customers achieve what they're trying to achieve. And for me, it's about being tapped into that because we all run the risk of becoming very insular. We get used to our environment and we start thinking within the context of that environment. We need to always open up our mind to what's happening out there and how could that actually manifest itself in our world, in our business, with our customers, and what does that mean? Or what are the opportunities that it presents that we actually could embrace? And I always love the phrase, a mind once stretched by an idea never regains its original dimension. So for me, it's around having that global outlook where you're all the time scanning the horizon out there and sort of saying, actually, there's something happening in India that's really interesting, or there's something that's happened in wherever, France, and that's particularly interesting in this context. And it's having that broad understanding of the global economy because we are in a truly global economy where 5 billion plus people are online.
So if we think from that perspective, when I did my MBA, and it was way back when the session had just started. So what you are currently saying is we have to understand international business, international laws from the perspective which help us even go more global. So in that context, when you became the co-founder of Digital Transformation Lab at Cork University Business School, what role do you think that think tanks are playing currently in order to shape the future of technology as well as business as well as law, particularly in context of, as you say, digital disruption? Because obviously international laws and business are intersecting and there is something happening which is global in nature. So where do you see that think tanks like yours play the vital role? What are they doing?
Think tanks are really important for a simple reason in that they get a diverse group of people talking about issues. So the only vested interest that the Digital Transformation Lab is to create understanding about what's happening. It's not for profit, so we're not in it for money. We volunteer our time, but we talk to fantastic people like yourself all over the world about what is happening and why is it happening and what does that mean and how is that going to change the world or change the business environment, or how is that going to manifest in terms of customer outcomes, which from a legal point of view is really important in terms of the technology is one thing, but how does that actually manifest in terms of the outcomes it delivers for customers or other stakeholders? And are we happy they're good outcomes? So for me, think tanks are great in that they explore. They have no vested interest in anything other than trying to understand and help people understand what's happening. And it's great. Look, I mean, I personally get a lot out of it because I talk to fantastic people. They share insights about the work they're doing or the books they've written. And you sort of say, wow, that is really cool. Or, wow, I never thought about it that way. But now that you mention it, And of course, it forces me to, if they're writing books, I need to read the books as well. So all around, it's a great process, I think.
Many think tanks which I have encountered have recently been talking a lot about ethical AI, responsible AI, how to use it, the kind of new thing that generative AI has brought in, the kind of digital disruption it has brought in. You already are working in the leadership position in this. How do you see this kind of approach impacting you or your thoughts while you are advising someone or lecturing on the same topics, let's say generative AI, fintech innovations, and all these aspects? How has this helped you? Or maybe, like you said, that it changes, it gives me a perspective that I go ahead and read those books or think about those talks. What kind of phenomenon have you seen in your thought process? How has it changed?
I think the most important thing to remember with any technology is that it's just a tool. The technology in its own right, it does nothing. We can program the technology to do A to B, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool. And as business people and leaders and lawyers and everything else, we need to be thinking about, okay, well, how can this tool help us with our goals or our objectives or our vision for the business? Because I think where people get a little bit confused is when they think about digital disruption and digital transformation and they start thinking about the technology, now it becomes a digital initiative that someone's pursuing, as opposed to, well, actually, our business needs to change. Here's why it needs to change. And now let's focus on how it should change. And in that context, we can pick up what that might mean by way of technology, but we don't start there. Right? So for me, it's around, let's understand how we need to transform our business. And that means we need to understand, well, what do our customers or stakeholders expect of us today, tomorrow, into the future? And if we bring that back to today, how do we need to start thinking differently about our business if we're going to be able to meet their needs in the future? And that's important because if we don't think differently about the business, we won't act differently in the business. And if we don't act differently in the business, the culture stays the same, right? So when we create a vision for the future and we sort of say, look, for us to be relevant in the future, and if we're in the private sector, for us to be competitive in the future as well, here's what it means. Now let's figure out how we're going to get there. And let's figure out what that means for all of our stakeholders, including our employees. Because in my experience, when employees hear the executive team talking about digital transformation, what's going through the back of their mind is, will I have a job? Now, it's far preferable if you can say, yeah, actually, our company is going to be even better into the future. And as part of that, you're going to have great skills that are transferable. Even if you decide to move on, your skills will be upgraded and you will be contributing to the vision that we have for this business. And I think for us, it's really around figuring out, okay, well, what are we trying to do and how does technology enable, support, or accelerate what we're trying to do? But it's not about the technology. Now, in that context, we need to make sure we're doing the right things because creating a good experience for our customers is great, but it may not be the right outcome for them. So we need to make sure that it's also a great outcome. So we want great experiences and great outcomes. And the lawyers will love this one in terms of if the outcome is not good, well, now you have a problem, right? Because as humans, we're not rational people. We do things that are not in our best interests, and that can be exploited, particularly with technology. So we need to make sure that technology is driving the right outcomes and that we, as business people, leaders, lawyers, whatever we might be around to say, hand on heart, yeah, that is a good outcome for our customers and stakeholders, and we're happy with the outcome.
That was about to be my next question, as in how do you plan this roadmap mindfully in order to make sure that everyone is kind of happy? I won't say everyone becomes absolutely happy. What kind of prompts do you give to your customers or clients or stakeholders for that matter? What do you see is the intersection point of finding that particular roadmap? Why I'm asking this question is, let me explain. The reason is many a times there is a conflict between the business and the legal side of the business, because someone says that law is not this, business person will be interested in getting that business, taking care of law obviously in the right way. How do you find solutions for that? Because disruption is happening and it has been taking place for, like, let's say more than 5-10 decades or whatever. But how do you find that particular solution is something
Well,
which I would love to understand.
it's a great question. And look, if you think about this, right, when an organization is a small startup, the founders, they're all over it. They understand the business, they understand the market, they know what their customers are trying to do, all those type of things. As businesses get bigger, they become silo driven because we need to be experts in this area and experts in this area and experts in this area. And the problem is the silos start competing with each other or not cooperating, and the business becomes disconnected from the customer. So the first thing we need to do is let's take away all the internal silos and talk about what's the vision for the business. So why do we exist, right? So you hear people talking about purpose, but why does this business exist? And how are we going to get there? Now that means that the top team in particular all have to be joined up and committed to the vision for the organization. Because if they're not, the organization will not transform. Because what will happen is all the people that work for, say, my part of the business will say, well, Tony's not into, this digital transformation. And someone might say, well, did he say anything? No, he said nothing. And that's even more powerful because that sends a message that it doesn't matter. So I think, funny enough, more and more, particularly in Europe now, we have this new corporate responsibility regime coming in where ESG is going to be mandated for all companies. And that's going to mean that in terms of governance of the organization, actually, you need to make sure that you're doing the right things. So I would say, look, we need to park the silos outside the door and get the people in the organization thinking about what they're trying to do for their end customer, because the customer couldn't care less how we organize internally. Right? That's an internal construct that's made to help us be more efficient. But the problem is when it becomes rigid, it actually stops us actually delivering on what we're trying to do in the first place. So I'd say if we're going to have silos, those silos are all joined up and working together, not throwing things over the wall and saying, well, that's my piece done. It's about working together towards a common goal or common vision for the organization. And that means everyone is on the one page.
So social responsibilities are there in the real world as well as in the online world. And for that, I guess recently, as a member of World Metaverse Council, you have started this particular thing in metaverse space as well. What kind of trends or similarities have you seen in the kind of impact this is having, especially the metaverse part, on the society as well as the business? And how are you finding that particular answer in metaverse world and the real world, I would say, for right now? How has it helped you plan a roadmap again for online and the real world?
The reality is the metaverse in many shapes and forms is already here. Unfortunately for the metaverse, the term metaverse got a bad name. The reality is what we're talking about is immersive internet experiences. So whether we want to call it metaverse, spatial computing, augmented reality, whatever, extended reality, all of the innovation is happening. And what we need to remember is that, look, there's 3.2 billion gamers in the world. And they're already, for the last number of years, since we were born probably, they have been operating in this immersive environment. Okay, it's been 2D, and now we can have 3D. So the metaverse is here. And what we need to think about as organizations is that, look, as all those gamers, I mean, if you take something like Roblox, something like 70% of 13-year-olds in the USA are on Roblox every day. Right? So when they come into the world as employees, entrepreneurs, customers, whatever, what do we think they're going to want by way of an experience? Is it go, oh, well, let's park all that wonderful stuff we do when we were growing up, and now we'll just get on with the real world, which is boring. They're going to expect businesses to be able to deliver the type of experience that they want. And what we need to be thinking about is that it's wonderful on one level because the technology, and you probably saw the latest stuff from OpenAI with Sora, where you can basically put in some text and it creates videos. And generative AI will actually be a key driver of the metaverse because you can create all these metaversal worlds just from text or from voice even. So I think what we need to be realizing is that on one level, there's an expectation from our customers, particularly our future customers, around the type of experiences that we need to be able to deliver. But there's equally an expectation for us as businesses that we're going to be able to do this in a responsible, legal, ethical, all those type of things. We need to get that right because the opportunity for this to go wrong is huge. And regulators all around the world trying to figure out, well, how do we get ahead of generative AI? How do we get ahead of the metaverse? How do we get ahead of, right? And the problem is, look, in my experience, regulation usually comes about as a result of failure. And it's very hard to figure out in advance what are all the type of things we would like to legislate for, particularly if no one knows what this world looks like, because it's continuing to evolve, right? So, but we can down some markers and sort of say, well, leaving aside the specifics of any technology, there are certain responsibilities about making sure we're using the technology in a responsible way, that it's in an ethical way, that we're respecting people's privacy, etc. So I think what we need as businesses to do is sort of say, well, yeah, okay, look, we may not know what the world looks like in the future because we can't keep up with the rate of technology change, but we sure as hell know how we are going to act in that world and what that means in terms of our responsibilities and how we need to think about things. So I think therein lies the challenge in terms of making sure, and it goes back to outcomes. Are we happy that we're using all these emerging technologies in a way that's driving good outcomes for our customers, and that we can hand on heart say, yeah, we did a great job and we delivered a great experience, and we have no qualms about it. It's great.
So I'll ask you a question from your answer where you said that regulations comes from failure is my
Yeah.
question. Why do you think that first? Second, on LinkedIn recently, I would say rather today itself, you have written something about how the long-standing technology suppliers or relationships have been challenged, and there have been some key actions which you have talked about where ICT providers are supposed to be mindful while they are doing this particular disruption in the society and the kind of work which we are doing. So, how do you think about that particular statement that you gave? And what are your views on this particular ICT providers? Why I'm asking this is because they are impacting the legal industry as well. And
Yeah. Okay.
one more addition would be, where do you see the new people who are new entrants in the field? How do you see that they can get equipped with this kind of knowledge, or how they can reach out to, let's say, find mentors or someone who can guide them? How do you plan that roadmap as you teach as well? And how do you teach your students for these kind of queries and issues which they encounter?
Firstly, if we look at the history of regulation, usually something has happened in the marketplace that no one is happy about. And regulators say, well, we must regulate for that. And we're now in a space where regulators they're still trying to get their arms around. Like if you take the European Union, it's planning to bring in an AI Act, right? And it's trying to get ahead of the curve. If you think of the whole debate about Web3, decentralized Web3, and what did we learn from Web2, where actually the social media companies own all our data and don't necessarily take responsibility for everything that happens. Regulators are trying to figure out, well, okay, if the web was decentralized and the walled gardens came down and people owned their own identity, what would that mean? Now, look, in many respects, that's a philosophical discussion in terms of whether it will ever happen or not. The challenge for regulators, in my mind, is on one level, they're trying to regulate the world of today that we know, and they need to make sure that it's been done right. On another level, like everyone else, they can sort of see, well, actually, there's loads of things happening out there, right? There's new innovations. There's no end to new innovations and new technologies. But the existing regulation doesn't necessarily cover that. So I think certainly in Europe, we've had a big swing towards principle-based regulation, where it doesn't have to be binary, what says you can or can't. It's more, well, actually, you should have known better, right? And I think the regulations are going to progressively move into, you should have known better. So the responsibility will come back on the business and the leaders and the boards to sort of say, well, look, if we're going to use the technology, we better make sure we understand the outcomes that it is driving and that we're happy with them. So that's at one level. So I think, look, regulation, it's a hard job in terms of, you're trying to regulate for something that doesn't exist today. I mean, it's kind of like throwing darts at the board, because the market can move in any direction. Right? And to my mind, one of the most important things is it's never one technology that makes the breakthrough. It's when you get a confluence of technologies that suddenly come together. Now you have new markets and total disruption that no one ever anticipated. So I think it's very difficult for regulators, but I think progressive principle-based regulation is probably the answer. In terms of technology firms, well, the tech firms, a lot of them are moving to everything as a service anyway. And I think the challenge for them is to understand, well, rather than selling technology, help their clients by understanding what are their clients actually trying to do and what are the issues they're grappling with, and how the technology as part of a vibrant ecosystem can help them get there. Now, the third part, why this area is particularly interesting is when we typically study subjects, usually those subjects have been around for a long time and they've been peer reviewed and there's science behind them and that sort of stuff. Right? When you're dealing with disruption, well, it's new. It hasn't been peer reviewed because it didn't exist. Right? It could go in a million different directions. So I think the capability that every person in any sort of business needs to develop is that sense-making capability where your antenna is out and you're picking up on what's going on out there and thinking of internalizing that back into, how do I make sense of that? What does that actually mean? Or how could that impact the business? Or what might that mean in terms of what my customers will expect of me in the future, or how we might need to operate in the future? So I think it's developing that sense-making capability where you have a feel for what's happening and where it might go. You have to accept that it's a little bit gray because no one knows where it might go. Right? Because if we think about the last 3 years alone, we went from a hype around cryptocurrencies to the metaverse to generative AI. We're now moving towards maybe quantum computing. Next year it'll be something else. So there's always going to be some hyped technology. But bear in mind, when they start coming together, that's when you get the breakthroughs. And look, we look back through history, some of our great breakthroughs were not designed for that purpose. They were designed for something else. And someone else came along and said, well, that's really interesting. If I did this to it, and then someone else said, well, I'll put this on. And then suddenly you have something that disrupts the market. So I think it's all the time sensing. It goes back to the earlier part of our conversation. Don't operate in your own little world. Right? Have your eyes open to what's going on out there everywhere in the world and what that might mean.
Moving ahead from this to asking you about your dual MBA, how has it contributed to your multidisciplinary approach of various prestigious institutions? How do you see that continuous education, or let's say continuous learning, skill development, has played a vital role in staying relevant in this kind of rapidly changing fields, let's say for technology, for finance, for law, everything? How has it helped you?
Well, the first thing I'd say is when the airplane leaves and the seat is empty, let's call it perishable good, right? Because you can't get that seat back again. The same is true for our education. Right? And we are responsible for keeping our education current. Right? Because I could do another MBA tomorrow, and as soon as I'm finished, it's out of date. Because the world that I did the MBA in has changed. So I think, look, the first thing we need to do is we need to take the responsibility for keeping our education current and up to date. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to always do formal courses. We can be reading, we can be exploring, we can be listening to things like this, we can be watching documentaries about disruption or technology or data privacy, whatnot. So I think the first thing is we need to think about, if we want to succeed in the world, just like an organization, we need to be relevant ourselves. And that means that our insights and our knowledge and our understanding needs to be contemporary, because talking about something that was relevant 4 years ago isn't going to do you much good in today's world, unless it's still relevant, of course. So the challenge is to make sure that we're all the time upgrading our education. And I see it with the programs that I run for the Irish Management Institute. We have people there and who have PhDs, they have masters, or this, that, and the other. And they're back to do short programs where they really want to understand, okay, so let's understand disruption. And it's interesting because you have technology people who are there to understand the business language because they can't communicate properly with the business people. You have business people there who want to understand, well, what the hell is all this technology? Because they can't communicate with the technology people. You got operations people kind of, well, what does all this mean? So we can have reasonable conversations with the technology people and the business people. So you got people coming from all different perspectives. And why are they there? They're there to increase their understanding and to make their knowledge more current. And it's interesting because when I look back over the last number of years, several people have come back and they've ended up with new jobs in their organization with the new knowledge, where they were using the knowledge to ask new questions. And I'm a great believer that breakthroughs are made with questions, not answers. So if you're asking the right questions from an informed basis, you will get to a new place. And that's what we all need to do, because what was great when we were knee high is no longer great, because that world is gone. We all the time need to be asking new questions. What is fascinating is, if you think about it, my two boys are growing up at this stage, but when kids are small, everything is why. And then we bring them into work, having gone through education, where we tend to beat it into them. The first thing we do is we give them all the rules and regulations and tell them this is how you must operate. Right? And I think what we need to do is get that spirit of asking why going again, and create the environment where people feel safe to ask why. And I would go even further than that. I'd say, look, one of our missed opportunities is we have all these young people in our organizations who have grown up with a smartphone in their hand, who use those metaverse type technologies every evening, weekend, whatnot. And why aren't we saying to those people, how can we use all this in our world and make our business better for our customers and make sure that we're relevant in the future? Because I don't believe the people on the board understand, and I don't believe the executives necessarily understand, but these young digital natives in our organizations, they do understand. They may not have the business understanding or may not understand the risks, but we can give them that. And the challenge is, how do we tap into that so that executives can make better decisions, and that we're also training our young people for the future?
Probably by the kind of connection you are establishing, as in connecting the old with the new and new with the old. But here, I cannot miss this pertinent question where you are saying that you keep on upskilling yourself, without which it will not be giving you the right questions, let alone answers. We don't have to wait for the answers, but we have to come up with the right questions. How do you see allocating these things in the newcomers, new entrants of the field, let's say of business, of law, of engineering, of any other field for that matter? How is it that it can be done other than academics, at least in terms of clearing their examinations, clearing things? How do you propose as a thought leader, how to inculcate this thought process, how to make them read more, write more, ask questions more? How do you do that?
If we're passionate about anything, we'll do that automatically, right? So I think if you're in an organization and it has a vision for the future and it resonates with you in terms of the vision and its values of the organization, etc., and it creates that environment where actually you're encouraged to bring back the questions and to engage in debate, well, that's the type of organization that many people will want to be involved in. Whereas if you're an organization where it's batten down the hatches, there's the rules, no room for thinking, well, that might work for some, but it won't work for most. And I think particularly when we look at the younger generations now, they're much more confident in expressing themselves, but equally they are less concerned about careers. When I left school, it was, if you got a job, you had to hold on to it forever. That's not the modern world. The modern world now is you create opportunities to build your experiences and your knowledge and your understanding, and you will do that many times in your life. So I think the real challenge comes back to the leaders of organizations to create the right environment where their people can see that there is a future for the organization, that they can be very much part of it, but they're also enabled and equipped. And like there's one organization that I'm very, very fond of, DBS Bank in Singapore. One of the things they do is they make it easy for all their people to go on training programs. But when they come back, they have to train their colleagues on what they learned. Now, I think that's fantastic, because now you have a network effect where instead of 3 people going on a course, actually 30 people have got the benefit of it. But in that process, they're having real conversations about, well, actually, that's really interesting. Well, maybe we could do that. Or why aren't we doing this instead then? So I think we need to rethink. And here's one of the big things in terms of digital disruption. In the past, the people at the top typically had the most experience. So 30 years experience in this industry. Now, the question we need to ask these days is, yeah, but is it relevant? So the real question becomes, well, as the leaders in the modern businesses don't necessarily have the right skills from a technology point of view or understanding, their role starts to become, how do we orchestrate the tapping into all of those skills in our organization so that the right answers come to the top? And they can do that by asking questions and by facilitating the exchange of questions and answers throughout the organization and making it a safe place to do that. So I think organizations are getting turned on their head. And particularly if you think about our customers, our employees, they're all turning over. They're being replaced by younger and younger digital native customers, employees, entrepreneurs, business partners, etc. And we need to be able to tap into that or run the risk that our business becomes irrelevant.
So not only upskilling yourself, but being relevant in that particular skill is also absolutely important, as you have stated.
Yeah, but also recognizing you don't have to have all the answers, that the answers may be in your organization, but you need to unleash them.
But you need to have at least the right questions to unleash
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
answers, I guess. So, keeping that in mind, I'll quickly go ahead and ask you, how do you encourage others, especially the ones who are in the managerial position or the higher positions? How do you encourage them to embrace this kind of change? Like you said, that someone who had 30 years of experience may not have the relevant experience right now. How do you help them embrace that kind of change, probably in the top management and the hierarchy?
So, look, it is a really fascinating area. The penny can drop sometimes at the executive level where the executives say, oh, yeah, we need to change. And you have all your digital natives down at the bottom, where we use that phrase, and they're all saying, yeah, but that's obvious. We should have done this years ago. But you have a whole bunch of management in the middle who are now feeling very uncomfortable because the executive are talking about something they don't necessarily understand, and the young digital natives are running circles around them. So the challenge is to make sure that that middle management level actually are bought into the vision and are being skilled and upskilled and trained to be able to be part of it. Because if they feel they're going to be excluded and left behind, your digital transformation will fail. And so you need to make sure that at that middle level that because they're the people that your young employees meet every day. I mean, if you think about it, how often do junior employees meet the board? Never. How often do they meet the CEO? Probably never. How often do they meet divisional CEOs? Maybe a town hall meeting once a year, whatever, right? The people they're meeting day in, day out are their managers or senior managers. And if they are disconnected from the vision and feel left behind, it's over. So you need to make sure they're not left behind, that you're actually bringing them on board, that you're skilling them and giving them the tools and techniques and the right questions to ask needs to be, so that they feel part of the vision and that they can look into the future and sort of say, I know where we're trying to bring this organization. I know what role I have in that. And I'm really happy about it because this is going to be great for our customers and all our stakeholders. So there's the key. If it's just top down, well, go forth and do digital transformation, it will fail.
Thank you for such a fascinating interview. We have already reached almost the end of the interview, but I would like to ask you one more question. What would you suggest the new entrants? How should they go ahead with this kind of understanding when they are dealing with one subject but trying to upskill in others? And what kind of impact do you foresee for them if they don't change, or if they change, in what areas they should focus, especially in terms of business and law, keeping in mind the globalized world which we are living in today?
I think business and law is a fantastic combination, because we all have to make sure we're doing the right things as businesses, that it's legal, it's compliant, that it's meeting all of the principle-based regulations that we're talking about. In my experience, people, when they hear the word digital and they start thinking this is about technology and I don't know anything about technology, they tend to run from it. When you actually take it away from technology, and I sometimes put up digital transformation and cross out to digital and say, actually, really what we're talking about is transformation here. And what we need to understand is how the world is evolving, how our customers are evolving, how the market is evolving, and how that might mean we need to change, right? And if we can focus on the broader picture, because quite often in organizations is they have been successful and that becomes their Achilles heel. They won't change because the model has worked. But meanwhile, the world around them is changing and it's going to be too late by the time they realize. So what we need to do is all the time have our eyes and ears open to, actually, there are better questions that we could ask. So, and just start bringing that dialogue into the organization, because most organizations, I would say, probably every organization wants to succeed and be successful. Right? So it can only be successful, though, if it's dynamic in its own right, because the world we operate in is dynamic. It's digitally disrupted. It's hyper connected. It's got new technologies coming at it from every direction you can think of. So we need to not necessarily focus on the technology, but understand actually there are better ways to do things that could actually enhance how our organization works or our business could give us competitive advantage or could put us out of business if we fail to respond.
So we are already talking about disruption and digital disruption, especially. Here, I cannot stop myself and ask you, how do you keep yourself so calm? What kind of hobbies do you possess which keep you that calm within this disruptive world and deal with everything going around with such peaceful mind? What are your, I would say, mantras for that?
In my case, it comes back to passion. This is something I'm passionate about. I'm a voracious reader. Every day is a learning day, right? So I'm reading every single day. I'm reading articles, I'm reading reports, I'm looking at stuff, webinars, etc. And so every day is an opportunity to learn. And if it's something you're passionate about, well, it's not work. It's just feeding your passion. So I would say, find your passion and, play into your passion. If you're passionate about it, it's not a burden. It's fun. It's exciting. It fuels you.
Wow, you found your passion, you found your love for that passion, and you are working without stress. That's an amazing answer. Finally, we usually have one question about family and how did you manage personal and professional lives, because that is kind of mandatory right now to understand if we are getting into such kind of business which is very toll taking, which has such impact on us. How do you do that? What kind of personal and professional balance have you found in life?
Well, I think, funny enough, the last number of years has been quite instrumental in changing everyone's views in terms of how you balance all these things. I think for far too long, organizations were focused on input as opposed to output. And I think, particularly the younger people coming through now, they're much more focused on what's the output you're looking for. And I think it's around balancing. We could all get so focused on something that we miss the world, right? And I think it's about making sure you have that balance. And, combination of, some remote work, making sure that you're prioritizing the things that are important in your life, because if you don't, you'll find that the world has gone by and you've missed them, right? Or they're gone. So I think it's around, trying to make sure that you're looking at you as a person in terms of, well, what am I trying to achieve? And how do I need to transform? Because it's not just about transforming the organization. How do I need to transform myself? Right? What does that mean in terms of my professional career, my personal career, my friendships, all those type of things? Because nothing happens without effort. And I can tell you that much, right? So you have to be clear on what's important to you and you have to put in the effort.
Your journey has been fascinating, and this concludes our interview. But this does not conclude our relationship. We would definitely love for you to appear with us, guide us, train us, let us know how to connect law and business. As you are sitting in a place where GDP is the highest in the world, I guess Ireland is number one.
Well, Ireland's quite a unique little country. Like, you have to remember, Ireland's quite small. Like, in the Republic of Ireland, we've something like 5.5 million people. So, but in the context of India, that's a small little part of India. But we are very outward looking, and we have a lot of foreign direct investment. So, a lot of American and other international firms using Ireland as a international base within the European Union. So Ireland has done particularly well in the last 20, 30 years, but funny enough, if you go back, you can trace it back to where Ireland decided actually the type of skills it was going to need into the future. And I think India is doing that now as well in terms of, building the economy of the future. But that takes time. But when you get there, suddenly it's great.
Thank you so much for appearing here and letting our learners know about your journey and guiding them through the whole process. Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Divya. Thank you.